Good evening, this is Pastor Barbara, aka Preacher with Parrots. Today is the 28th of February 2018. It's a Wednesday night. We have, right now, small but live group. We're getting ready to study the 13th chapter of Judges, which talks about the birth of Sampson. And he is the last of these judges. Excuse me. I got this water out here. It's left over from Sunday night. So let's try it. Okay. We believe that Sampson wrote the book of Judges. All of these judges went from 20 to 40, a little bit more, years that they ruled. And we're now on the 13th, or thereabouts. There's some question. So obviously, nobody who was living when the first of these judges, or early ones like Deborah, is still going to be alive at the end. So it's more likely that one of the latter ones wrote this. We have a couple of these judges, and they weren't really judges. They were just spiritual leaders that the Lord used. We have some of them that we only have one verse about. That stands to reason that somebody has heard the stories and they're writing it down. That would stand to reason that it would be Sampson toward the end, because the ones at the beginning are not going to hear any news about what it's like at the end. But the ones at the end, if there's nothing written, and in some of these cases, all we know is their name. So there's nothing written about them. This is a rather unusual, and we have I'm checking here. We have Judges 21 chapters, and we're in 13. We have considerable about Sampson, and Sampson is a fellow that has trouble with women. Nevertheless, God uses him from time to time, and for a period of time, to be the leader of the Israelites and keep them serving God until they get to the place where they no longer do. In everybody except Sampson, God has spoken to them. Here we are with Sampson, the birth of Sampson in chapter 13. And I'm reading this time from the New International Version, as I explained before we started the program to those that are here live. I did study this in the King James Version. As you can see, if you don't already know, you can see boxes behind me. And that's because we had water in my house. 4 rooms, supposedly, were damaged. So everything comes out of those rooms, and they go into these boxes. This is upstairs. 2 of the bedrooms are closed off. That leaves only 1 bedroom for me to sleep in, and it's downstairs. And of course, the main computer is upstairs, as is the kitchen. So when I first came home from the hospital and moved back into my downstairs room and had difficulty climbing the stairs because my knees were bothering me, I had a friend who came and brought some things from upstairs and brought them downstairs to me. So it was like 2 weeks that I was like canned soup with crackers. And I'm trying to gain some weight that I lost over the illness. And canned soup and crackers doesn't do it. Anyway, coming back to this is why things look like they do. And you'll hear me discuss that I did things downstairs. Downstairs, I have a King James Bible, and that's what I was reading. Up here, I have several others, many others, and this is one I'm reading. Here we go with the birth of Sampson. The Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. For 40 years, Israel was in bondage to, or subjected by, the Philistines. Another verse we see throughout this book. First of all, let me tell you, what is this book about? Why do we have this book in the Bible? We have the book of Genesis. In the end of the book of Genesis, we have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob is also named Israel, and his 12 sons. That's how Genesis ends. When they move into Egypt, because Joseph, one of the sons, was second in command, and so his family got to live in a very special place. But when the Pharaoh that appreciated and elevated to a high position, Joseph, when he died and others died, they didn't know who in the world these Israelites were, except they had a lot of kids. They got multiplied. And they were afraid that there were so many of them that the day could come if another country wanted to invade or take over Egypt, they would only have to become friends with the Israelites who are now slaves. So we go from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 sons of Jacob becoming slaves for 40 years. Excuse me. We go from there to 400 years of slavery, and we have no Bible for that time. The book of Exodus, the second chapter, the second book in the Old Testament, begins with Moses as a baby growing up and bringing them eventually out of slavery. So we go from the early beginnings, then we go to a period of 400 years we don't have a lot of information about, but we know that that period existed. Then we go to Moses, brings them out of slavery, gives them the law, and guides them for another 40 years and then dies. So we've got the beginning. We've got Moses bringing them out of slavery and dying. And then we have Joshua. Joshua is the one that God uses to get them into the land that he had promised them, the land of Canaan or the promised land or Israel. And with the death of Joshua, that period ends. Now let's skip over Judges. Where do we go from here? We go to Kings. We've got a couple of short stories, but historically, the next thing that happens is Kings. So we've got the beginning, Moses getting them out, Joshua getting him in the land. We got the book of Judges, and then we got Kings. Judges is no more than the quick stories of the various times when Israel did not serve God. And so the Lord had told him from the very beginning, I'm not going to come down and do bad things to you. But if you don't serve me, I'm going to let your enemies do bad stuff to you. So every time they went through a period of time, here they went 40 years, they didn't serve the Lord. During that time, God didn't do bad things to them, but the Philistines did. A certain man of Zorah named Manoah, he was from the Danites. Dan was one of the 12 sons. He had a wife who was sterile and she was childless. Now, an angel, not the Lord, an angel appears onto this sterile woman and says, you are sterile and childless, but you're going to conceive and have a son. Now, we had this with Abraham. We had it throughout the Old Testament and occasionally in the New Testament. This angel, it is an angel. Remember, an angel does not have a body. An angel is a spirit. An angel is not like people. An angel isn't like born, gets old, dies, has kids. No, angels were created. The angels that were created, those same angels still exist. A third of them were kicked out of heaven. We called them demons, but they're fallen angels. So angels are not like people, but they can, because any spirit can use a body, or we're talking way back then when that happened. No. An angel, they perceive it to be God at the beginning. An angel tells the woman, you're sterile, but you're going to conceive and have a son. There were, in the Old Testament, and because there were still Jewish people in the New also, certain things that people could promise to do that were spiritual, holy, and things like that. And let me stop here for a moment because we're being joined by 50 plus folks who are on page 1. And that means you can't see our chat box. You don't know who all is here present. You don't know that I'm making a copy of this, which will be on Facebook possibly tomorrow or the next day. But you've just tuned in, not because you tuned in, but because you are where you are. Therefore, you are without any choice. You're getting to watch me. On Wednesdays, we're in the Old Testament, and we're now in the book of Judges. Now, this angel comes and tells this sterile woman things that not only the son should do or not do, but she, as the mother of this special son, and it's going to be Sampson, and yes, it's going to be Sampson and Delilah. So we now have the angel coming to her and says, see to it you drink no wine or fermented drink. What's the difference between wine or fermented drink? Well, in the Bible, different words are used for wine. I could look it up. I have the books and what I need to look up and see. This is the word in English. This is found in the 13th chapter of Sampson. What word was used in Hebrew? Not having done that, I think I can give you the reason why it says no wine or fermented drink. I believe that here the wine they're talking about is not fermented. I know somebody that used to make beer in their bathtub and drank it. I heard about it. I never saw it. It was in my family. But I presume that when you take grape juice and you keep it too long, it's going to ferment, so you're going to get wine. And I think this is why I think it's referring to grape juice and fermented stronger drink. And I think the reason they mention it this way is because who knows? One day it's juice, the next day it's wine. So the child, well, first of all, the mother, you drink no wine or fermented drink, and you do not eat anything unclean. There are Jewish foods, more so in this particular time in history, that were unclean. I believe, and most ministers believe, that the reason God had them down as things you shouldn't eat, because they really were not good for you. I eat almost no pork. I have lived in other countries. I've seen those pigs. I know what they eat. I've seen pigs wait for somebody to get through going to the bathroom so they can have lunch. I don't eat pork. Well, I eat mostly fish and chicken, but that's just because it's simple. The mother is to have no wine or fermented drink. Were they allowed fermented drink from time to time in the Old Testament? Yes. It wasn't encouraged, but it was allowed. But you could take an oath, something that's spiritual that you want to do for God. You could take an oath and say, I'm not going to do this. Now, present day examples would be priests and nuns who God doesn't say, you can't get married. But if they're going to be a priest or a nun, they're not going to get married. It's a choice. It isn't something God says you got to do. But if you choose to do this, then you don't get married. Now, he says, because you will conceive and give birth to a son. They want not only the son to take these vows, but before the son is born, they want the mother's body to have, even though she doesn't take the whole vow, at least this portion of food she does. No razor may be used on his head. We're studying Sampson and Delilah. Samson is dumb enough to tell Delilah, and I say dumb enough because he already had an experience of telling a woman something, and she couldn't keep it a secret, and he suffered because of it, gave her up. No razor may be used on his head because the boy is to be a Nazirite. This would be called the Nazirite vow. There were those who chose to take it. Actually, when you study the vow, certain things would happen to them, or they would complete the vow. They would say, I'm going to do this for a year or 5 years or whatever. The vow would be completed, and then they would shave their head. Then they could go back and do it again if they wanted. But no, he was never to shave his head. No razor may be used on his head because the boy is to be a Nazirite. He will, whether he takes the vow or not, the angel is telling Mama, your son is going to be a Nazirite. set apart to God from birth. Not every Nazirite is set apart from birth, but he was going to be. And he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. First verse in chapter 13 says they've been 40 years under the Philistines. And I'll repeat because I may not have said it before we got the people by virtue of the fact that we're being featured. God told Israel way back in the part of the history that we're studying now, I'm not going to come down and do terrible things to you. But if you serve other gods, I'm going to let your enemies do terrible things to you. So the Philistines were doing terrible things to them for 40 years. Now, verse 6, the woman went to her husband and told him. She says, a man of God. Well, it turned out to be an angel, not a man, but you see what you see. You don't know too much about a person's interior when you're just looking at him. You see what you see. Perceived it was a man from God. At least he knew about the Nazirite law and so forth. She tells her husband, a man of God came to me. He looked like an angel of God. Very awesome. I didn't ask him where he came from. And he didn't tell me his name. But he said to me, and she's now telling her husband what the angel told her. You will conceive and give birth to a son. Now then, drink no wine or fermented drink. And do not eat anything unclean, because the boy will be a Nazirite of God from birth until the day of his death. I don't know of any other case that comes to my mind right now in the Bible where somebody is a Nazirite their entire life. This man was to be a Nazirite his entire life. The Spirit of God would come upon him. He would have great strength. He didn't have this great strength all the time. But where did his strength come from? From the Nazirite vow and from keeping that vow, which in his case, in verse 7 or 8, would be from his birth until the day he died. Then Manoah, he's going to be the dad. He's the husband of the sterile woman. Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, "O God, I beg you, let the man of God that you sent come to teach us how to bring up the boy who's going to be born. This is going to be quite an unusual son. And we know we're going to bring him up. God may start using him when he's 20, 30, whatever. But we're going to have him when he's 5 days old." God heard Manoah, and the angel of God came to the woman while she's out in the field. Again, she's out in the field. He's not around. But her husband Manoah was not with her. The woman hurried to tell her husband, "He's here, this angel guy, he's back. The man who appeared to me the other day." So Manoah gets up and he follows his wife, and he comes to the man, who is, of course, an angel. And the future daddy says to the angel, "Are you the one who talked to my wife?" And the angel said, "Yes, I am." So Manoah said to him, "When your words are fulfilled," in other words, when this kid is born, "what is to be the rule for the boy's life and work? What should we know? How should we bring him up?" The angel of the Lord told him, so now the angel is telling the husband as well as the wife, Your wife must do all that I told her. She must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine. Not a grape. Not grape juice. I think the reason she couldn't drink that grape juice is because the difference between juice and wine is a matter of fermentation, and that's a matter of time, and who knows when it's going to happen. So just don't have anything to do with the grape, and you will save yourself taking strong drink when that wasn't your intention to do it. Don't eat anything unclean. She must do everything I've commanded her. So Manoah, I'm going to get my Bible up here a little higher if I can. Manoah said to the angel, we'd like you to stay until we prepare a young goat for you. Angels don't do sacrifices. The sacrifices in the Old Testament, whether they brought, in the case of Jesus' birth, a couple of doves, or whether they have more money and it happens to be a lamb, or it might even be an oxen. In that case, I told you, angels are not human beings. And he's asking the angel to participate in a sacrifice. What were the sacrifices in the Old Testament? They were precursors to something that happened. And I want to tell the ones that have just popped in that as soon as I get through teaching, we will open it up for you to discuss this. It's only when I'm teaching and I've got my head up and down and so forth that it disturbs me, frankly. I guess it's old age or something. But we will have an opportunity for you all to talk later. Angels do not participate in the Old Testament rituals like this. Why? These Old Testament rituals where an animal was sacrificed is a type of prophecy that in the future Messiah will come and will be sacrificed. Since that has nothing to do with angels, they were created, they're still living. This has nothing to do with them. And this is the reason I believe the angel hesitated in saying, sure, I'll enjoy a sacrifice with you, because the sacrifice looked forward, and angels do not look forward to being born again. They are totally different kinds of creatures than people. All right, let me continue now. We'd like you to stay until we prepare a young goat for you. The angel of the Lord replied, even though you detain me, I will not eat any of your food. He's an angel. And you would say, how about my wife's an angel and she eats food? You know what I mean. I will not eat any of your food, but if you prepare a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord. You can give the Lord an offering. That's okay. You can, because they were human beings. They could do this at the present, what was then the present time, and look forward to the future, because they were human beings. So if you prepare, go ahead, prepare a thing, but offer it to the Lord. And then it goes on to say in verse 16, Manoah did not realize that it was an angel of the Lord. Had he realized it was an angel, now he called him an angel, but had he it dawned on him it was an angel, it would have dawned on him. Then Manoah inquired of the angel of the Lord, "What's your name, so that we can honor you when your word comes true? When we have this son, give us your name so that we can tell the whole family and everybody we know, so and so said this was going to happen, and it did. What is your name?" And he said, "Why do you ask my name? It is beyond understanding. If I explained this to you, you'd have a hard time figuring it out." So Manoah, the father-to-be, took a young goat and a grain offering, because there were grain offerings, there were oil offerings, um, uh, there were a number of offerings besides animals. And the Lord did an amazing thing while Manoah and his wife watched. Now, they weren't being nosy. They really wanted to be able to tell later, this is what happened and this was the guy's name. But the angel, of course, does not give them a name. As the flame blazed from the altar toward heaven, they take their goat, they offer it to the Lord. The angel is not partaking of this offering. He's not making the offering. He's not partaking of it. As the flame, because you have fire under the offerings, as that flame blazed up from the altar toward heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame. That's how he said bye. They make the fire. They have the sacrifice. And all of a sudden, the angel is in the middle of the fire and he ascends into heaven. As this happened, Manoah and his wife fell with their faces to the ground. I mean, they've got to know God is in this or something. This was more than a man. And they fall to the ground. And the angel did not come back to Manoah and his wife. And then they realize this is an angel. "We're doomed to die," he tells his wife. "We've seen God." No, they haven't. Angels are creations, just like human beings. But the wife answered, "If the Lord meant to kill us, he would not have accepted the burnt offering or the grain offering from our hands." In verse 24, this is the 13th chapter of Judges, and this is about the birth of Sampson, as in Sampson and Delilah. "The woman gave birth to a boy and named him Sampson. He grew up and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him while he was in Mahanadan, where the descendants of Dan, one of the 12 sons of Israel, lived. Now we get to Samson's marriage. He grows up real fast here on us. So we're now in chapter 14 of the book of Judges. Samson goes down to Timnah and he sees a Philistine woman. "We got a problem." We got a Philistine woman. No Jew, much less a Nazarite, who is going to be dedicated and live the Nazarite vow from his birth to his death, would marry a Philistine woman. God always told him, marry your own people. And as you've heard me say before, that's not because the Jews are better than other people. It's because they were Jews. They were offsprings of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They had a promise as to what their future would be. And when you go off and marry people from the next country to you, you are getting closer and closer and closer to serving the God that they serve. It's the same with Christians. We tell Christians, if you really want to live for God, don't spend time with don't spend time, in other words, go to McDonald's. Don't go to the neighborhood bar. Why? Well, because you go there a few times. You make friends there. You go there oftener. Pretty soon you're eating what they're eating, and pretty soon you're drinking what they're drinking. The way to avoid this is don't go with people who serve other gods. He's calling them Philistines. He could have chosen, he could have called them Egyptians. He could have called them many other things that did not serve God as the only true God. That is the problem with hanging out with the wrong people. You become like them, whether it's us now as Christians or whether it was them back. So he falls in love with a Philistine woman by the name of Timnah. And he tells his parents, get me her. Evidently, they were well off, and if he wanted something, he just asked. He sees this Philistine woman. He says, I want her. There's no specific command to him, but there's a general command to the whole country. Do not do this. If they convert and the men become circumcised and the family becomes Jewish, that's okay because they have converted. They are now Jewish also. Get me her as my wife. His father and mother replied, isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? That's like, you can't find a good Christian woman to marry? You've got to go marry, and then you just pick whatever religion that serves another god you want to and put that name in there. Sampson said to his father, get her for me. She's the right one for me. Well, you know, that's not too cool. That's not too bright. But then he's young. And you have to get real old to get real smart. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines for that time, for they were ruling over Israel. See, Samson is not a leader yet. He has not yet helped them get out of the trouble they were in with the Philistines ruling them. He went down to Timnah with his father and mother. They went to the vineyards of Timnah, and a lion came roaring at him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. As I said, he did not have 24 hours a day power to do unusual things. But when the Spirit of the Lord came upon him as a Nazirite, having taken the Nazirite vow from birth to death, to come upon him in power, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands as he would a young goat. A little goat like this. A strong man can rip him apart. A lion? Now that's another matter. This was not a baby lion. This was a big lion. But he told neither his father or his mother what he'd done. He didn't tell them, hey, guess what? I was out, I saw this lion, and power came on me, and I was suddenly strong, and I just did this and ripped this lion apart. He didn't tell his parents. He went down and talked with the woman, and he liked her. You know, I think this guy liked women, period. I think she could have been old, ugly, whatever, and I think he just had a problem with women. Liked him, didn't have good sense, didn't take advice from his elders. Later, he went back to marry her. We haven't even got to Delilah yet. Turned aside to look at the lion's carcass. So this lion that he ripped apart, the body is there. In that body was a swarm of bees. What had happened is that within this dead body, the bees made a nest. He didn't tell them which he scooped out with his hands, and he ate it. So there's some honey in there. So he scoops it out with his hands, and he's got honey. And he eats the honey, and he gives them some. Now this is important, because this is where he has his first encounter where a woman does him in. So he's got this honey in his hands. He sees his parents. He's eating honey. He gives them honey. They eat honey too. But he doesn't tell them that the honey came from the carcass of a dead lion that he killed with his bare hands. Keeps this stuff to himself. Now the father went down to see the woman, and Sampson made a feast as it was customary for bridegrooms. Big party. When he appeared, he was given 30 companions. Now Samson knows something nobody else knows about the lion and about the honey. He's got 30 companions, 30 friends to the wedding now. And he says, let me tell you a riddle. If you can give me the answer within 7 days of the feast, I'll give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. If you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. This is the riddle. This is what people are supposed to figure out. Out of the eater, something to eat. Lions usually eat other animals and people. But out of the eater comes something to eat. And out of the strong, which is a lion, something sweet. That's the riddle. For 3 days, they couldn't get an answer. So on the 4th day, they go to Sampson's wife. Verse 15, chapter 14. Coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we'll burn you and your father's household to death. Did you invite us here to rob us? These 30 men that are invited as companions to the wedding. Either we know the answer and we get each a garment, or we got to give him a garment. Did he bring us here to make himself rich? Then Samson's wife threw herself on him. Oh, baby. If you really love me, how many true stories do you know that have this in it? If you really love me, you've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. What'd she need to know the answer for? This had to do with the 30 men. It isn't like he was withholding something personal from her that you would share with a spouse. So on the 7th day, he finally told her, because she continued to press him. She bugged him. Honey, tell me if you love me. Tell me, honey, please. She in turn told a riddle to her people. Here we go. Her people. Who are they? The Philistines. They're not Jews. They're not Israelis. They're not Israelites. They've got no interest in their future. Before sunset, she barely learned it. And before the sun went down that day, every man in town said, and here's the answer to the riddle: what is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? Samson said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, I certainly wouldn't want some guy of mine call me a heifer. If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. You got this from my woman. Then the Spirit of the Lord, even though he's acting stupid, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him in power, because this only happened when the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. He didn't have power 24 hours a day. He went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them down to their belongings, and gave their clothes to those that had explained the riddle. Burning with anger, he went up to his father's house. And Samson's wife, the one, Daddy, buy her for me, gotta have her. Samson's wife, who, because she wasn't Israeli, she was something else. She tells her own people, they're her people. She's closer to them because she grew up Philistine than what she is to her husband, who she just met. Burning with anger, he goes to his father's house. The wife is given to a friend who had attended his wedding. Hey, who's at the wedding? You over there, come here. She's yours. My wife, the one I'm marrying in this wedding, she's yours. I don't want her. Now we have Samson's vengeance on the Philistines. We're in chapter 15. I'm looking ahead to see whether we will get to Delilah. She is in chapter 16. We'll see. At the same time, chapter 15, at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. A wife? She's living with a guy that was at the wedding. Now you're doing what? You're taking a young goat and you're visiting her? And he says, I'm going to my wife's room. But her father, he's not dumb. He's got to be thinking, my wife really blew it. She lost him. And now he wants to go into her room. What in the world is he going to do? But the father would not let him go in. I was so sure you thoroughly hated her, he said, that I gave her to your friend. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead. The father of the woman who blew it all by telling is looking after his daughter. Sampson said to them, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. You know, he's got a right not to be stupid. I will really harm them. So he went out and caught 300 foxes, and he tied them tail to tail. Every two, he tied their tails together. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails. So there's a torch on the two that are tied together. He lit the torches and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. So here we've got these torches in the grain. He burned up the shocks and standing grain. When I was 10, I went to spend some time with my grandparents, and I had two cousins, male cousins, that were 12. They were big enough to work in the field, and they used to do shocks. What a shock was, at least in Missouri, about 76 years ago, was where they got a bunch of grain from here, 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 and put it all together and then tie it. That's a shock. And then they go and do that again. He went out and caught 300 foxes and ties them. He's got 150 pairs. And he fastened a torch to every pair of tails, and he lit the torches, and he turned them loose in the grain of the Philistines. He burned up their shocks, or their grain, and standing grain, together with the vineyards and olive groves. So then the Philistines said, who did this? They were told, Sampson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because his wife was given to his friend. So the Philistines went up and burned her and her father to death. Samson said to them, since you've acted like this, I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. Then he went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Edom. Now the Philistines went up, and they camped in Judah. And they said, why have you come to fight us? And we've got about 5 minutes to go. So we will just about get through. And that's on the video that I'm making. So that'll just about get us up to chapter 16, which is where Delilah comes in. We've come to take Samson prisoner. 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave. They said to Samson, "Don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us? The people that are ruling over us, now you've made them mad at us." And he said, "I surely did to them what they did to me." Well, they said to him, "We've come to see you up and hand you over to the Philistines." Samson said, "Swear to me you won't kill him yourselves." He knew he had this power. They didn't know that. He just wanted to be alive in order to be able to use it from time to time. They said, "Agreed. We'll only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you." So they bound him with new ropes and they led him up from a rock. The Philistines came and they shouted. Now, again, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him in power. The ropes on his arms become like charred flax. In other words, they've got him tied with ropes. You know, if they tied me with ropes, I'd still be tied. They tied him with ropes. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he has a superpower. And so they bound him with new ropes. And the bindings dropped from his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, the jawbone of a donkey becomes a weapon in his hands. He grabbed it, and with it he struck down 1,000 men. Then Samson says, this is what he says, "With a donkey's jawbone, I've made donkeys out of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I've killed 1,000 men." When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone. And then they give the name of the place where they were when he threw away the jawbone. Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, "You've given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst?" Boy, he exaggerates, doesn't he? "Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" Oh, so now they're uncircumcised. Before, they were worth marrying. Now God opened up the hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it, and Samson drank, and his strength returned, and he revived. So in the spring, this was called En Hakoi, and it's still in that town. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Now I've got just about 2 minutes left on this video, so I've got to turn it off. We'll chat a little bit about it, but that's as far as we're going to go tonight. We may talk about some other things, but this video is over with. Until the next video, God bless.